Firstly, it's been a great day, and it was a great idea, and thank you to Dublin Civic Trust and the Mountjoy Square Society for coming up with it. I'll just mention as well that some of the images that I'm going to show and some of the photographs were taken by the students from UCD who did a project in Mountjoy Square over the last 3 years in the first semester, particularly John Butler and Kate Cregan. So I'm going to talk about the approaching streets and lanes of Mountjoy Square. Of course, the most important street, approaching street, was and still is Lower Gardner Street and Middle Gardner Street, the street that goes from the Custom House to the square. From the public building, Gandon's masterpiece on the river, from the city centre, to the residential square on the hill. The level of Mountjoy Square is 16 metres above sea level, and the Custom House is 4.9 or something like that. So you're going up the hill. And this was Gardner's way of linking the square to the great public building. It employs all of the things that were so important in 18th century city planning and that are still relevant, very relevant. Orientation, legibility, a sense of place, the vista, the view, direction. You stand at the Custom House looking up and you can see the trees now of Mountjoy Square. In Gardner's day they wouldn't have grown. And you can see the houses actually of the north side of Mountjoy Square. And if you stand at the square looking down, you can see the Custom House. The dome of the Custom House. Unfortunately, that railway bridge, which was in the beginning of the 20th century, the railway bridge went across there just below Abbey Street, so that, in fact, the view is not complete. You don't see the whole facade. Will we ever live in a city where a railway bridge like that would be taken away so that you could reinstate the original idea? That street suffered immensely in the 20th century. As we know, the whole of Middle Gardner Street was demolished. Parts of Lower Gardner Street were demolished. At least because the rebuilding there took so long to come about, by the time that we started rebuilding there, we had learned that you must build on the building line. So the proportion of the street remains. And people question the quality of the architecture, but it at least is the same height as or similar height to the original buildings, and in general, but not always, the same material is used. So some of those principles are the principles of how you maintain those ideas of the 18th century, where streets were places, a sense of place, that had direction, that had views, and that had orientation. You knew where you were in the city. If I stand at the top of Mountjoy Square and look down and I can see the Custom House, I know where I am. Likewise, if I stand at the bottom and look up, I know that that's Mountjoy Square on the hill, connecting the residential city to the public building of Gandon's masterpiece. So there are actually 8 approaching streets to Mountjoy Square. Because of the particular configuration of the square, the corners are closed, so each corner has 2 streets. I'm going to talk today about, essentially about 3 of those 8 streets, though I'll also mention the others. And those streets are Upper Gardner, Gardner Place, and Belvedere Place. Now those streets, as you can see from that plan, still contain or still have the urban grain of the 18th century city, because the 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century terraces still exist. At the bottom there you can see the diagram, the bottom of the image, you can see the diagram of what we call the Georgian section. That's the theory of the Georgian section. You have square, street, house, garden, mews, lane, mews, and so on, a back-to-back system. Whether this may have worked somewhat sporadically in the North Georgian city, in the beginning, in the 18th century, in the early 19th century. We know from reading about 19th century slums, Jacinta Prunty's work, that very soon after these houses were built, the back lanes became pits for poverty, cholera, and very poor conditions. Apparently the Ordnance Survey note takers, Jacinta Prunty says, in as early as 1837, talked about how the great houses on Mountjoy Square and described these grand places and the pavements of granite and so on. But to the rear, already in 1837, very small houses for the poor were being built. And so we had the situation in the 19th century in Dublin where the poor and the rich were living cheek by jowl. So I think it's a real challenge for us we have to reinvent this idea of the Georgian section. And we have to learn how to deal with it, because we're really not dealing with it. So I'm going to talk about three of the back, what I call the interior of the squares there also. The first street then is Upper Gardner Street. It's a late 18th century terrace, early 19th century as you go up towards Dorset Street. You can see on the plan there that it still has the urban grain of the city. That I'm talking now about the west side of the street. So these houses are, I'd say about 50% of them have got historic fabric. They're very well looked after. The other 50% are in poor condition. It's a mixed ownership. Some people, there's one or two or three perhaps people who live there and who live and work from those houses. There are quite a few landlords who pack in as many people as possible per floor, and there's a few hostel owners. Enforcement is an issue, but it's not enough in that I think we have to be more proactive about enforcement. There are guest house owners who look after their houses very well and have historic fabric in the houses that are looked after. Somebody said earlier that I think Karen perhaps, that we should be using a carrot and a stick, or that somebody used a carrot and a stick. Something like this is called for. That we have to be more proactive about enforcement, because even though these are protected structures, some of them are not being looked after at all, and daily you walk up that street and you can see things on the facade that shouldn't be happening to protected structures, and that's only what you can see, because we know that there's stuff going on behind. We also have to incentivize, as Garrett was talking about earlier. There has to be some way of making it easier for people to live in the city, in this part of the city, and to maintain the heritage of the whole city, because it's your heritage, it's everybody's heritage. It's not just the private owner of the house. On the other side of Upper Garden Street, we have early 19th century development. That's St. Francis Xavier Church, the parish church, built. The first stone was laid in 1829, the year of Catholic emancipation. It's the Jesuit church. It's also the parish church. Just beyond it there is the parochial house, and this side of it is a convent. So that block is owned by religious orders and institutions, and for that reason it's fared much better than some of the others. So as we move along Upper Gardner Street there on the eastern side, that building is this building, and you can see this Dublin Calp wall there. Many of you possibly drive up and down that street and you've no idea what's behind there. I should have mentioned, of course, the traffic that someone brought up earlier. This street, Upper Gardner Street, all of Gardner Street is one of the major routes into the city. And despite the fact that it's a residential street, it's full of traffic all the time, particularly at rush hour, which makes it noisy and not very suitable for living. And perhaps with this new Dublin traffic plan, I'm hoping that some of the traffic will come off that, but I think Ciarán Cuff's point earlier about getting the traffic engineers involved in these issues is very important. But let's just jump over that wall. That's what's behind. I was very surprised when I found this not so long ago. It's a semi-private park because it's the park of the parochial house of St. Francis Xavier. Those houses that you see beyond are the houses on Upper Sherrard Street. And it's an example of how well the interior blocks can be used and are used in the minority of blocks around this area. What we're looking at there is the parochial house of St. Francis Xavier, and this is the wall of the lane. In the centre, there is the Victorian, part of the Victorian school buildings of the convent. That's the lane that, on the other side of the wall that I pointed out a moment ago. Now you'll notice that there are gates here. This happens quite a lot around Mountjoy Square, and it probably happens on the south side as well. People put gates on the lanes. Now, in this case, probably it has the same ownership on either side, and it may even be a private lane for all I know, but on the older maps it was a lane. People do this for security issues because, these lanes can be dangerous. They want to park their cars there, and so they close it off. Every time that happens, though, we lose a little bit of the public realm. You notice there in the picture this piece of street furniture, and that's it there. It's built into the wall of marble and Irish limestone. It's a holy water font. You can, with those in the past, you used to be able to come with, when people wanted holy water in their houses, you came with your bottle, turned on the tap, and it was piped back to the church on the street. A remembrance of how things used to be. Then beside the church there is the corner of Belvedere Court. So Belvedere Court is the Mews Lane behind Mountjoy Square North, and that's where the national school for the area is. It's quite a successful lane. We're looking down that lane now towards Upper Gardner Street. The house there is, that's number 12, Upper Gardner Street. And this is part of the Victorian buildings of the convent. And then here we have the gateway into the national school. So that lane is filled with children and their mums in the morning and afternoon when they're going to pick them up. You'll notice that sign there, Shomer Spree. It's called a social, what is it called? A social space, an autonomous social space. I'll talk a little more about that later on, but just to show you because we have a group of people here, one of the things you can do in Shomer Spree is you can not get your bicycle fixed, you can go in there and be advised on how to fix your bicycle for free. And that's what those people are doing there. They're talking about something to do with a bicycle. So that block was this. And now we're going to cross over the street and have a look at this block. This one is much more chaotic. Should I just go back for a minute? This here is St. George's Church, Francis Johnson's masterpiece, the finest neoclassical church in Dublin. The idea of it was that it could be seen from all the streets of the Gardner estate. The spire could be seen. That's just to give you your bearings. So there we have the spire. And this is probably an example, well, it's an example of a lot of things. Chaos, confusion, it's the graveyard of a number of planning initiatives. You can see from that image that we just don't know what we're doing with the back lanes and with the interior of the blocks. These prefabs are on top of Temple Street Hospital. To give you your bearings, that's the new block of the Mater Hospital. These are the sheds at the back of Gardner Place. They're storage mainly, and the same here. And there are some of the gardens at the back of Upper Gardner Street. This is a trade union building at the back of a building on Gardner Place. So some years ago there was an initiative, a planning initiative that was about the idea of urban density. We should have density living in the city. I'm not against that idea. The idea about the lanes was if we have people living in the lanes will become safer and people will be able to walk there at night. It didn't work because this is one, as you can see, it's standing there on its own. It's beside, those two buildings are the original Muse buildings of 11 and 12 Upper Gardner Street. In front, this is a surface car park for the Mater Hospital. There was also a planning permission that thankfully wasn't built for a 16-metre high parking garage without windows or openings that was to be built on that site opposite that apartment building and about 6 metres away from it. So we can be grateful to the recession for some things, though it may not have been the recession that caused not building that. Here are some other, further down, this is Kelly's Lane, further down at the back of Upper Gardner Street, nearer to Dorset Street. That's a very early apartment building by Zoe Developments. This one is entered from Upper Gardner Street, so the developers were able to let apartments there. But it didn't do the job of bringing people into the lanes because you just drove in there to your car park, but you couldn't, you went in from the front. Naturally, anyone who would live there would want to come in from the street. So it's going against some of the principles of the Georgian section, actually, because it's trying to make front out of the back. That, and as well as that, is the thing of the diversity in the city. Can we have residential at the back and residential at the front? And then where do all of the other things that have to be, that residences depend upon, like the car mechanics and other such functions, go out to industrial estates outside the city, and you have to drive your car out to them. So this is the challenge, I think, for all of us have to look at this and decide what are we going to do about it. Part of the reason why I think high-rise was allowed was because of the social housing on this side of the street. This is a much earlier development, but as you can see, it's about 5 stories high. So let's look then at Gardner Place. Gardner Place is also an authentic 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century terrace. At the end, you see the spire of Finlayter's Church. Again, the 18th century idea of orientation. You see Finlayter's Church, so you know that that is where Parnell Square is. You're looking back the other way, you look towards Mountjoy Square, you see the trees of Mountjoy Square, and you see the corner, the enclosure of the square, the idea of the corner being closed. There's another view there of the south side of Gardner Place. And this terrace here is, in the gardens of that terrace are intact, and the wall at the back, which we'll see just in one moment. So these things are, here we have terraces that were not demolished in the 20th century. We all regret the demolition of the Gardner estate. And we know that that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. But so now, should we not be cherishing the buildings that we still have? And it's not enough. These are all protected structures, but that's not enough because it's not protecting them. And that's the south side of the street again. As you can see, all the elements of the Georgian city. This is the back then, a much more coherent back behind Gardner Place, between Gardner Place and Grenville Street. That's the, and I wonder whether this is successful partly because these social housing buildings were built on the streets, not on the lanes. So this truly is a back. This is a recent work by Dublin City Housing. And it's still reading as a back, and for that reason is successful. And there's a playing area and there's a community building. So moving on, that's the front of Grenville Street Flats. Probably the most successful of the social housing from a street point of view in the approaching streets of Mountjoy Square, because the material is correct. It's not on the street line, unfortunately, but it's the right height. Moving on, that's the other side. Now, this is North Great Charles Street. Again, we have in this one the social housing. We're holding the corner here, but the social housing steps back. And so there are lots of gaps on this street, and it's very confusing. This, however, is standing down at North Circular Road, looking back up to the square, and this terrace still exists, and is another one that should be cherished. This is the sort of crazy landscape of Great Charles Street, with this interesting church, but looking rather forlorn there. And if we're talking about density, why do we have all this open space? Surely this is the place where we should have 5- and 6-story residential buildings. Fitzgibbon Street, pretty much the same story. And then to talk about Belvedere Place, a very beautiful late 18th century, early 19th century terrace of houses, all in look like pretty good shape from the outside. I haven't been inside these houses. That's them at the back. Their returns still exist, and it looks like the returns were built with the houses. And looking back down to North Circular Road. So all of those approaching streets, with the exception of Upper Gardner Street, go from a lower place in the city up towards the square. So the square is a plateau. Just to come back to Chaume-Spree, one of the, perhaps a positive thing is that when you have dereliction in the inner city, and you have failed policies and so on, you also have low rents. And if you have low rents, sometimes interesting things happen. This group of young people rent this space. It's on Belvedere Court, and it's a place, they say it's a hub for positive resistance in a city and society where public spaces have been eaten away by consumerism, property speculation, and the culture of the car. You can go there and meet people and chat, have tea or coffee. It's not for profit, it's non-hierarchical. They teach languages, they screen films, and other interesting things. That's all.